Hello guys. Today I'm going to be talking to us about a feature in Dagster that I really love. It's called code locations, and I'm just basically going to share my thoughts on code locations and how you can start using them within your Dagster deployments today. All right. So let's think about a scenario where like you're working within an organization and then you pretty much deploy an orchestrator and you basically want your orchestrator to function in a way that different teams within your organization can, come up with like different workflows and like have different workloads and then, have like a central place where they deploy those workflows for them to be processed. Right. And so typically, um, you'll probably have, say, something like this, and then, let's call this the orchestrator, right? And when you basically deploy your orchestrator, let's just say for example, you have within your data science and AI function two teams focused on like two different kind of workloads entirely, right? So let's say you have like a data science and AI team that's focused on um customer satisfaction, focused on churn, that kind of work. So they are building models to predict churn, to figure out how they can improve like customer satisfaction. They have to like build pipelines for it. So let's just say this is data team A, right? And then let's say you have a second data team. They are also within the data science functional org, but then they are focused more on like fraud detection, and that kind of stuff. So let's just say data team B. Let's say for whatever reason, both teams use TensorFlow, right? But then data team A uses TensorFlow version 1, and data team B uses TensorFlow version 2, right? Right. Usually, when you deploy your orchestrator, right, you will typically also provide all of the packages required to run like the jobs that will be, managed by orchestrator. And typically in traditional orchestrators, these things are usually tightly coupled, right? So let's just see you have packages here. Make sure I'm spelling that correctly. So you have packages here, and this will be tightly coupled, with the orchestrator traditionally. And so, in this kind of scenario, you run into a very typical problem. How do I install TensorFlow version 1 and TensorFlow version 2 within the same environment, without doing any legwork, and then have data team A and data team B submit their workflows to my so-called central orchestrator without running into problems. This is kind of like one of the problems that Dagster code location solves for, right? But then that's really not the only scenario. So let's consider another scenario. Let's think about a scenario where, let's say, you are kind of like doing managed services for different like clients. So let's say you're a consultant and then you have, let's say, like three different companies. So just to illustrate again, you have company A, company B, and company C. Uh, here here, right? So you have these three companies, and then let's say these three companies, right, are basically paying you to manage their data function. So you're building ETL pipelines, you're doing transformation, you're doing all this cool stuff for these companies because they don't have like a data org internally. And then obviously you're charging them. It will make the most sense for you to like have like maybe one central deployment and then be able to like manage all their workflows within this deployment, right? So like I mean you push out your orchestrator and then um I mean across these different companies they can be for some reason using different versions of like different packages, that can still be an issue. But then also like how do you ensure that you don't end up managing three different orchestrators when you can have one? And then basically you just have different code for each of these companies running. Um, and then you can basically manage it from like one central plane, right? So like in that kind of scenario also, code locations are great, right? Because I can pretty much have a dedicated repo, like a GitHub repo for component A, dedicated GitHub repo for component B, dedicated GitHub repo for component C. And then I can basically take advantage of this concept called code locations in Dagster, such that I can point all of these GitHub repos and the workflows within them and all that stuff to the same orchestrator, and then I can neatly manage it, right? I mean, we're going to go through a demo together and I'll show you what it looks like. But then like, I mean, that's literally another advantage, right? So like there's literally separation of concerns, and then it's very easy to let's say move, let's say component B out of that deployment into something dedicated if they want something dedicated and they want to pay for it, right? And so in that kind of scenario, there's no tight coupling between the orchestrator, the environment where the code runs, and then like the code assets, right? Themselves. So like I mean, all of these things are loosely coupled and it's easy to work with it. Let's talk about another scenario. Let's just say it's one organization, right? Like you're in a product company, and then you have a highly sophisticated data organization. So you have like data engineers or pipeline engineers, whatever you call them these days, right? And then you have um let's say you have analytics engineers, uh, and then let's say you have ML engineers also, right? And then like all of these people are building different stuff, right? Usually, I mean, we've been focusing on how like code locations are cool, but then let's talk about monorepos, right? Usually, right, there's a very high tendency that sometimes the code that is supposed to be managed by orchestrator is tightly coupled to the location where the logic of the orchestrator or like the assets that basically represent the orchestrator lives, right? And so you would have one GitHub repository, and then like you have your data engineers working out of that repository. You have like your analytics engineers doing like their DBT jobs and all that stuff. And then they are working out of the same repository. And then you have like your ML engineers, building like their machine learning pipelines and doing deployment and all that stuff. And then they're working out of the same repository. This can quickly become very painful for many reasons, right? So there's usually something we call CI/CD, right? And that's like the process through which you manage like continuous integration, and basically continuous deployment. So in some way, it kind of like impacts life cycle of like development and how you go from development to production, right? And they might have like different processes, right? So for like the data engineers, they probably just have unit tests, and then they lint their code and then they push it to production. You'll agree with me that the CI/CD workflow for like something like DBT is a little bit more complex, especially when you're running DBT core or you're orchestrating DBT core, and it has its own nuances. And then, I mean, if you're doing like ML stuff, how you think of CI, how you think of CD, can be extremely different. So like trying to run all of these things from like a single repository can be extremely painful, and like very difficult to manage. So, I mean, again, code locations for the win. So what exactly is a code location? So the way Dagster thinks of this concept of code locations is that you can have one deployment of Dagster. So let's just call this like a Dagster deployment. And I mean, in another video, I'll probably go into details of like what it means when we say a Dagster deployment. What do we mean when we say a Dagster instance? What's like an ephemeral like instance of Dagster, and an instance of Dagster that's not ephemeral, right? But then yeah, let's say you have like a single deployment, right? And then the idea with code locations is that all of the code and the environment where that code can be executed is kind of like coupled together. So let me just put like one more box over this one. And so like you have like your assets, you have your jobs, you have your sensors. Yeah, okay, let me just make this better. Assets, and then you have jobs, you have like sensors and schedules, right? You have all of these things, and then you have like the Python environment. where all of these things are supposed to be executed, right? And so like you basically provision this thing and somehow you kind of like connect it to your Dagster deployment. So in this case, just think of the deployment, as something that's comprised of your web server, the CLI, and then the daemon also, right? So like let's think of this when we're talking about deployment, let's just think about these three concepts, right? So I can basically have a single web server, I can have like my daemon, and then I can manage this thing and I can have multiple instances of this thing called the code location. So it means that the data engineering team or the pipeline engineers can basically have their own GitHub repository. They can have their own packages that they want to work with. In fact, they can have their own version of Dagster that they want to work with. And then basically they can somehow deploy this and still allow for all of that to be centrally managed by one Dagster deployment. So you don't have multiple Dagster deployments, because you have like different Python packages, right? And then you can run stuff, on different environments. So somebody can have their code location powered by EC2, you can have your code location powered by ECS, and someone else can choose to have their code location powered by Kubernetes if they want EKS, right? That's on AWS. So like, I mean, that kind of like superpower is like super amazing, right? Like that's like really, really chill. And that's pretty much the whole idea. So let's go over an example together, right? So let's say that you have let's create a folder here. Let's call it code locations, right? Let me move it into this place just so I can keep everything together. And then let's just say, I mean, just to keep it simple, we'll represent um the code location as a file because I mean what exactly is a code location? It's basically like like a module that has a definitions object exposed and then you're kind of like trying to tell Dagster how to interact with that definitions object because obviously your assets, the sensors, the jobs, like the way you would basically expose them when you're trying to deploy is through something called like definitions in Dagster, right? So in your definitions, you pretty much like make your assets available, you make your sensors available, you make resources available, all that stuff, right? So I mean the definitions object is pretty much important when we talk about like code location. So let's just say you have like a finance um code location, uh UI, right? And then for like the finance code location, let's just say it's something like this, just to like, I mean, this is like a dummy example, right? So you basically have your assets. In this case, I don't have jobs, I don't have like sensors or resources defined, but then basically I'm exposing this guy. And because I'm exposing this guy, this qualifies for something that I can expose from tree code location, right? And then let's just say I have like marketing. I'm going to just call it CL, TY, right? Let me rename this to CL, just I mean it's so verbose. So let's just say uh, CL.py, and then like for marketing also, I'm going to pick this up, bring this here, and then just put it here, uh, take this one away. Well, I mean, we can leave it, right? And then I can just say, I mean, printing money is fine, right? So I have these two things, right? So how do I basically expose these code locations? Like, how do I basically start um a Dagster deployment and then expose them. So the last thing I need is something called the workspace dot the YAML file, right? And then here, what I would typically define is I'm going to tell Dagster how to load that code, right? So I'm going to put like a load from, um, and then I'm pretty much going to say, oh hey, like we're getting this from a Python file, right? Usually there are like three methods to which you can load code locations. So it can be a Python file, it can be a Python module, or it can be a gRPC server. If you're going to production, obviously, and we're trying to like take advantage of the idea of moving away from mono repos to like dedicated like service-oriented repos, we will pretty much want to use the gRPC server. I have like a more like fully fledged example for that. We're going to talk about it in a bit. But then pretty much what you want to do is let me change this attributes to devs. And then just going to change the code location here and see that the way you can find the code location is something like this. Right, so code location financial.py, that's what we call it, right? Financial.py. And then, we can do the same thing and we can choose to give it a name, right? And so we say finance code location, and then we can do this again. Just we can do this again, and then put it here, right here, right? And then like we have two code locations, right? So like once we have this, the next thing we do is we pretty much just run Dagster dev. So like and then just do Dagster dev. And then when we run this, we can access our code location here. And then we go to assets and then, view the global asset lineage. And then what you can see here is that we have like the different code locations. And like the reason you're saying it this way is because I gave all of them like different groups. So you have daily spend, revenue, acquisition analysis and retention analysis. They're basically four assets, in like four different groups. Obviously, you don't want to do something like this verbose, but I mean, you get the idea. So now we have two code locations, the finance code location, and it has two different groups of assets. So your daily spend assets. So you can have more assets that are like daily spend assets and then like your revenue assets, whatever that means to you, and then like you have like marketing, like code location also, and then you have like acquisition analysis and retention analysis. And that's pretty much it, right? But like this is like an extremely simplified example where like we're just kind of like, I mean, we have one repository pretty much, and then you have like two files, and then you're using like the Python file method to load your code locations, right? In production, that's not really what you would want to do. In production, what you pretty much want to do is you will pretty much have let's go back to Scali. You pretty much have like three different repos, right? So you have like repo one, repo two. Let's just keep it at two, right? Because I mean, at the very least, I believe that if you want to orchestrate DBT with something like Dagster, then you should, like separation of concerns, isolate DBT because DBT is already a whole lot. Like, I mean, there's a lot of things that you can kind of like do, a lot of functionalities to explore. You can basically have a repo that would grow into like something that has quite a number of subfolders, and quite an amount of code. And so like you pretty much want to manage that separately. And so like I'm a big fan of keep the extraction and loading workflows in a like separate place, separate repository if possible, and allow people who are like focused on that to work on it, and then keep like your DBT like workload, your DBT code, and like everything that concerns DBT alongside the Dagster definitions that allows you to orchestrate DBT from Dagster in a separate code location, right? So you can have like let's say this is like your EL, which is like extraction and loading repo, and then you can have your like DBT or your AE your AE workloads here, in like another isolated environment, right? And so you pretty much, have like a CI/CD pipeline, you're gonna like push stuff to this repo from your local, sorry, right? So you do like local development and then like you push stuff from like your local to your GitHub repository that should trigger your CI pipeline and eventually your CD pipeline. In your CD pipeline, you pretty much have maybe something like a Docker file. You build an image, you push it to a container registry, and then from that container registry, somehow it makes its way into like your deployment environment, right? And then same thing, same idea would apply for like your AE or your DBT workflows, and then you kind of like push it into that same environment also. So instead of creating like three different repositories, I'm basically like representing it in like one like folder. But then think of this finance code location, marketing code location, and ML code location as three different repositories. So you have like a data team focused on like finance stuff, another one focused on like marketing, and another one focused on what's it called, like your machine learning function within the organization, right? And so they can basically just deploy stuff in like different repositories and like have that code deployed, and then they can expose each of these code locations as gRPC servers. Obviously, I'm doing things locally. If you're familiar with like Docker networking in Docker, you understand why I'm setting the host to this. And then I mean, I can also use like something like Docker Compose, and then basically I can get these things to communicate using like the service name, but then I'm choosing to like do the hard work of like um just deploying like different Docker services just to kind of like show the idea of, oh, if I have three different like machines, or like let's say EC2 instances, for example, I can have my code running in isolated EC2 instances, and then maybe like I just have like a static IP address, and somehow I'm able to like work out the networking. I can basically point all of those things to a single Dagster deployment. And so if I run, let's just confirm that nothing is here, and then if I run the all, what you see automatically is that like I'm able to kind of like start all of these things. And so if I run something like make open, like I mean automatically what you see here in my global is that I have my finance code location, I have like chargebacks, general ledger, I have my marketing code location shown in prediction. Need to find the third guy, right? And then, like you have like your ML code location also, and I can just like materialize all the assets, and, I can materialize them, and I mean, all should be well, all should be fine. Like everything should run. So if we go to runs, oh, seems like I didn't materialize. So let's go back to assets, um, view this, and then materialize all, and then assets can only materialize together if they're defined in the same code location. So I mean, I can basically just select these two and then materialize selected, and then view. Yeah, and I mean, what you see here is like it's running, and then these two assets has been materialized. Great. So that's pretty much everything. I will make more videos like this, if that's something you want to see. And then I will basically go like more deeper into like how you think about going to production with something like Dagster, right? So I believe that like planning for production is very, very different from like maybe trying to like POC Dagster locally, and like use like a Docker compose file. All of the stuff, like the complicated stuff I just did with like Docker and like Make, you can find them here. If you're not a fan of running like individual like Docker containers and then connecting all of them through like a network, you can also like explore the same idea using like the Docker Compose file. But yeah, hopefully this gives you better intuition into like what code locations are in Dagster and how you can think of using them. So let me know if you like this, and I'll be happy to make more videos. Cheers, guys. Bye.